Stewart's liquid bluing and Frankenstein's creation. What's the link between them? Well, before we get down to that, let's just make sure you understand that this is not Frankenstein. This is Frankenstein's creation, and in Mary Shelley's classic book, always referred to as such, not as a monster. And incidentally, Frankenstein was not a doctor, he was a medical student. But what links these two, Mrs. Stewart's bluing and Frankenstein's creation? The bluing agent in here is ferric ferrocyanide, which was discovered in the early 18th century by an alchemist by the name of Johann Conrad Dippel. And he was a German, and he was born in Castle Frankenstein, which is a castle right by the Rhine River. Frankenstein actually in German means stone of the Franks. And it was an ancient family by the name of Frank who founded that castle, where he carried out his experiments in a laboratory. And Dippel was an interesting character. He would mix together animal hides and potash to brew up all kinds of things, thinking that he could transfer life into dead. He also believed that souls could be transferred one person to the other, even developed funnels in order to do that. There are even stories of him digging up corpses to see whether or not they were remnants of their soul. Now, of course, many of these stories may be apocryphal, but one thing is for sure, that Johann Conrad Dippel played a major role in discovering ferric ferrocyanide, which is the agent in liquid bluing. He was mixing up his animal hides and bones and God knows what other kind of animal parts with potash, and he mixed it in an iron pot, and all of a sudden he found this blue coloring, and it became widely used in the textile industry as Prussian blue, and it still is used today in that industry. Now, what is the connection? Well, Mary Shelley took a trip down the Rhine River with Percy Bysshe Shelley, who was her husband, and she had married him despite the fact that Percy already had another wife, but that's another story for another time. And on their trip down the Rhine, they heard stories about castles. Now, we don't know for sure that Mary visited Castle Frankenstein, but stories abounded about Johann Conrad Dippel and his experiments with these animal extracts that were supposed to make people live forever. And also, of course, his curious experiments with digging up dead animals and people. So it may be that Mary Shelley heard these stories, and when they ended up in Switzerland and the weather was bad, and they decided to pass the time away by trying to write scary stories, well, the story that was written over just a couple of days was the classic Frankenstein, written by a young 18-year-old Mary Shelley. So that is the link between Mrs. Stewart's bluing ferric ferrocyanide, Johann Conrad Dippel, who may have been the model for Frankenstein, who of course made his creation.